long before America, long before Europe, long before kings carved their names into stone, slavery already existed. The oldest clay tablets ever discovered describe human beings as property. Some of the earliest stories in the Bible begin with people in chains under Pharaoh. The Quran speaks of captives taken in war. The ancient Indian Vedas divided humans into castes at birth, some destined to serve, others destined to rule. From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the forests of ancient China to Viking battlefields, every civilization on earth enslaved someone. Every race, every empire, every person alive today descends from someone who survived it. Yet in the modern world, we are told it was only one chapter, that only one group suffered, that only one story deserves to be remembered, while all others are ignored. But the real story, the full story, is older, deeper, and far more uncomfortable than the versions we are allowed to discuss. So if every race was enslaved, if every empire practiced it, and if every nation still lives with its legacy today, why are we taught only one story? Who decides whose suffering matters more? And what are they trying to hide by keeping the rest forgotten? Let's find out. Hello, I'm Mike Joberg, a former Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker. Today, we're going to answer these questions. Slavery began the moment early human tribes realized they could force another group to work for them. The oldest clay tablets on Earth, from ancient Mesopotamia around 4000 BC, already contained laws governing slaves, debt bondage, and prisoners taken in war. By the time humans learned how to write, slavery was already ancient. In Egypt, long before the birth of Moses, foreign captives were marched into mines and quarries to build the wealth of pharaohs who believed their power came directly from the gods. Across the Indus River, ancient Indian Vedic texts described rigid social divisions that eventually became the caste system. Entire families were locked into servant roles from birth. Their children inherited the same fate, with no chance of escape. In China's Shang and Zhou dynasties, war captives and criminals were branded, bought, sold, and treated as property. Entire families could remain enslaved for generations, their names erased and replaced by the identity of their owners. In ancient Greece, slaves labored in silver mines under conditions so brutal that most never lived long enough to see freedom. In Rome, at the height of the empire, nearly 1/3 of Italy's population was enslaved: Gauls, Germans, Greeks, Jews, anyone conquered by Roman legions. Children born to slaves were automatically slaves themselves. In Africa, long before European ships ever appeared, powerful kingdoms captured rival tribes, sometimes for labor, sometimes for human sacrifice, sometimes for trade. Slavery was not foreign to Africa before Europeans arrived. It was embedded in the region's political and economic systems. In the Middle East, the arrival of Islam did not end slavery, it regulated it. The Quran addresses the treatment of captives, the rights of slaves, and the conditions under which manumission was encouraged. The Arab slave trade lasted over 1,000 years, transporting millions of Africans, Persians, Slavs, Greeks, and others across vast distances. In the Americas, long before Columbus, many indigenous tribes took captives in war. Some were adopted, some were tortured, and some became hereditary slaves within the tribes that conquered them. Every corner of the earth has its own version of this story. Every civilization has its own record of who wore the chains and who held them. Slavery was not invented by the West. It was not created by Europeans, and it was never limited to any single race. By the time the first European ships crossed the Atlantic, slavery had already existed for thousands of years, and nearly every human society on Earth had practiced it. The Atlantic world did not discover slavery, it inherited it. By the year 869 AD, in southern Iraq, 500,000 African slaves known as the Zanj rose up against the Abbasid Caliphate in one of the largest slave revolts in human history. They had been brought to work plantations near Basra under conditions so brutal that most did not survive more than a few years. The rebellion lasted 14 years. Cities were destroyed. Tens of thousands died. And when it was finally crushed in 883 AD, the slave trade continued as if nothing had happened. From Baghdad to Cairo, from Zanzibar to the Indian Ocean world, men, women, and children were trafficked for centuries. Some were castrated and sold for many times the price of an ordinary slave. In the medieval Mediterranean world, Slavic villagers were routinely captured by nomadic groups and sold into Byzantine and Islamic markets. Genoese merchants exported thousands every year. Mamluk armies were built from enslaved boys who later formed Egypt's ruling military elite. In West Africa, long before European arrival, kingdoms like Dahomey, Ashanti, Oyo, and Congo had state-level systems linked to slavery and captive trade. Some historians estimate that before Europeans entered the market, around 12 to 14% of West Africa's population lived in some form of servitude. The Atlantic slave trade did not emerge in a vacuum. It was built on an existing global system. What made it different was not brutality, not scale, and not the idea of enslaving others. It was timing. For the first time, slavery entered an age of global navigation, bureaucracies, and written records. Between 1500 and 1800, about 12.5 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic. About 10.7 million survived the journey. Most did not go to the United States. Nearly 5 million were sent to Brazil. Around 4 million to the Caribbean. Only about 3 to 4% ended up in what became the U.S. Slavery followed economics first. Ideology came later. The system was driven by labor demand and profit. For the first time in recorded history, a civilization declared slavery morally wrong. The abolition movement began in Britain. In 1807, Parliament abolished the slave trade. For decades, Britain spent enormous resources patrolling African coasts, intercepting slave ships, freeing captives, and burning vessels. Other nations followed. The bloodiest reckoning came in the United States. The Civil War erupted in 1861 with slavery at its core. Over 620,000 Americans died. In 1865, slavery was finally abolished there. Yet slavery persisted elsewhere. In Brazil until 1888, in Saudi Arabia until 1962, and in Mauritania until 1981. Slavery existed everywhere, across all civilizations, across all races. What matters is not only what happened then, but what we choose to do now. Because a divided public is easy to control, and a united humanity is not. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.